he was very conscientious about giving his audience everything that he could every time he went out on a stage. And he was so concerned because he was having little vocal problems because of the flu. And so just at time for the curtain to come up, Red and Sonny usually brought him down to the stage, and they were standing there, and he had slipped off from them. And it was time for the curtain to go up, and they were frantically searching for him everywhere. And 2001 Space Odyssey music, whatever it was coming on, and we were all doing our high screaming and singing out there, and Elvis was nowhere to be found. And they finally went to the men's room, and they opened the door of the men's room, and there he was, and he was in there kneeling down, praying, and asking God to help him to be able to touch his fans with the music on that particular night, because he always wanted to give them everything that he possibly could. He was almost like a preacher when it comes to that, wanting to minister to the people only with his music.
Whose throat God has pressed down a harp of 1,000 strings. It only needed tuning. Elvis's voice was that type of voice that agreed with the thought of Calvary. He had that kind of bent and inclination and attitude that suggested that God could use him.
Once you develop a hero, and in Elvis's eyes, J.D. only got bigger in his career. I don't think he ever thought that he was bigger than J.D. I think maybe he always thought that J.D. was always a little bit bigger than he was, you know.
Many times on the stage, he would come over when he started to introduce me, and he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, here's a man that I've known since I was 14 years old. He's the greatest bass singer in the world," and said, "I never thought I'd get to share his stage." He said, "Thank you, J.D., for letting me share your stage." And I had about 2 feet, and he had the rest of the stage. But that's kind of a man he was, you know.
It mattered not to Elvis who was in the spotlight. He was in the spotlight, J.D. was in the spotlight, James Burton was in the spotlight. The thing that was important to him was that they did a good job. As long as they did a good job, they were as important in his own mind as he was.
I walked up to him and I looked at him and I had tears in my eyes. I said, "Elvis," I said, "I can't believe that you called me out to sing in the middle of your show, and I'm an absolute nobody." And I said, I just can't believe it. And it kind of makes me fog up now to think about it. And he looked at me and he put his arms around me and he hugged me. And he said in my ear, he said, "I'm not so big." I looked at him, I said, "You're so big. You're such a big star. You're so big." And he hugged me and he said, "I'm not so big. I'm only 6'2". And it was quite an impressive thing to me to have that happen to me. And it made me feel such a part of what he was doing.
Though his most ardent fans felt he could do no wrong, Elvis was well aware of his shortcomings and grew increasingly uncomfortable with the adulation lavished upon him.
We were in Notre Dame playing a show at the arena there at the college, and right in the middle of the show, across the very center of the arena, a bunch of girls had bought the center seats all the way across. It was a long row. And in between songs, in the middle of the show, they picked their moment, and they all stood up. And across the center of the arena was this huge banner that said, "Elvis, you're the king." And Elvis just stopped and went, "No, Jesus Christ is the king." And they just sat down immediately, totally embarrassed. And then we went on to the next song. But it sent chills up my spine because I was going, he wasn't mad at them, but he made a point. It was amazing that the reviewer never mentioned it or anything. But I will never forget it. It was a big moment for me.
He kept telling us we were going to do a gospel album, and so we finally got to do one, and it was a huge success.
You know, we talk about an artist who does something like when a Springsteen does a folk album, how edgy and how a lot of guts this guy has to do that. That probably what they thought about Elvis. Man, this guy's got a lot of guts to do this. This is Elvis Presley. What are those young girls going to think? They're going to think he's religious or something?
And I said, you know, as great as this album is and all the success you have, I said, you know, God is the one who made all this possible. I said, God has placed you in a unique situation. And I said, you know, you are really blessed. And he turned to me and he said, you know, I know that. And I know that I couldn't have done it without God. He realized that everything that came to him came from God, and he cherished it that way.
His friends noted that Elvis was often confused about why God had allowed him such success and acclaim. Yet he never questioned that his gifts were from God.
Had he lived and become healthy, Elvis could very well have got into, for the first time, gospel music, and maybe he would have been the first contemporary Christian singer. Because in a sense, you look back at those records, especially the last one, He Touched Me, when he sort of exposed the whole world to Bill Gaither and to Andre Crouch, to Mile in the Forever, all those great tunes. In a sense, he turned the secular world onto what was happening in gospel music. To that point, I think it was basically a smaller world for that music, and he opened it up to the whole world.
He touched me, and now I am no longer the same.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who loved music as much as he did, and that is what I admired about him. Not the fact that he was this great star, but the fact that he was so special in that this was not something he was doing for money. He literally loved music.
We do 2 shows a night for 5 weeks. A lot of times we'll go upstairs and sing until daylight, gospel songs. We grew up with it in the time I can remember, like 2 years old. It more or less puts your mind at ease. It does mine.
At that time, it wasn't as enjoyable for me because of being tired and kind of won't take a break from it, you know, singing so many hours. But if I had that opportunity to do it again, I would sing just as long as I could stay up. For I think right there is where I really found the real Elvis Presley. And it wasn't so much what we did; it was what happened in the room, the atmosphere, how it changed from one setting to this unbelievable setting where cold chills are on your arm, you know. And I kind of used that in my analogy of the Holy Spirit sort of came in there, and it sort of dwelt among us, and we really began to live the words instead of singing the words. It kind of came in there and saturated us and made us all equal. I think that's the thing that equals us all out, because when Elvis started singing, you knew he meant what he was singing. You know, he meant those words. I'm not here to make him a saint, and I'm just telling you the truth of how it was. But I really believe this deep foundation that his mother had, these deep roots in the church, gave Elvis something to shoot for, maybe.
Something happened, and now I know he touched me and made me whole.
Somewhere or another, Elvis is singing today. You got J.D. singing bass. And he's got some wonderful people with him. And if we'll be good boys, and if we'll be under God's submission, then we'll get to sing back up again with him. And then we'll never lose again.
There are times when I would walk downstairs and hear Elvis in the piano room, and he would be alone at the piano singing gospel songs.
I was raised up in a little Assembly of God church. I always attended a church where people sang. They sang hymns and spiritual, worship God, you know.
They really were very religious people and have kept it that way throughout all their lives. Gospel, religious music was definitely in his soul. It never left, ever.
Glory, glory,
gospel was constantly going on ever since I can remember. I would beg him to sing How Great Thou Art, because that was my favorite. His bedroom was, maybe 8 feet away from mine. There was always music coming out of there, especially at 3 or 4 in the morning. I remember being woken up, and I would go in there and listen. He'd have the stamps up there, or his people come up and they'd all start singing.
He would have loved to have been in a gospel quartet.
He was on a never-ending spiritual quest.
He was thirsty for knowledge. He had such an inquisitive mind.
Elvis always was searching. He always wanted answers. He always had that fight between, what was right, what was wrong.
I believe that all good things come from God.
It all came down to God, for him.
And Bel Air, the sprinklers were going, it was those kind of sprinklers that would move back and forth. And the way that they were positioned, it looked like angels. And Elvis thought he was seeing angels, and he thought that they were calling him.
Lead me, guide me.
So he would go out, and he wanted people to come and see, what he was experiencing. He would see these things, and we would try so hard to see the same things that he was saying or pointing out to us.
He sung in the stamps to sing one of my favorite songs. Why me, Lord?
He always had questions about why him? Why me? Why have I been given this talent? He never really understood why all the adulation.
Because no man is perfect, but there was only one perfect man, and that was Jesus Christ.
He felt that he could do so much more with his talent. And he saw all the people that he had coming to his concerts, and he knew that he touched them, but he never really knew what he was to do with it. What did God want you to use this for? He had so many people as his following that he felt that what could he give back that was of importance, that could be heard, that could somehow help. And I do believe that he thought at one time that it was to be a preacher.
I think he thought he possibly had a religious calling, that all this was going to lead to some type of way he could make mankind a little better.
I need all the help I can get.
My own thing, just from knowing him, is that his spirit came through in the music, and so that's kind of what permeated whatever he did, and it would touch other spirits, and it's sort of on a different level.
Elvis came from a very special place of creativity. He did what he felt. He followed it. He wanted very deeply to follow his instincts. He was just really following his soul.
There was no difference between his image and who he was, except for that who he was even more important and bigger. Everything you saw that he had was what was there, what he gave, and he never lied. He never put up a front of any kind. He was who he was, and that's what came through, and his image didn't come anywhere near where he really was as a human being.
This is a man who contributed so much to our culture, to our history, to his audience. He only wanted to do good work. He only wanted to follow his vision and his passion.
Deep in my heart, there's a trembling question. Still I am sure that the answer's gonna come somehow.
I would sit in his dressing room when I'd go see him, and he'd be there fidgeting, waiting for his second show. He felt he should have stayed in the church and not become an entertainer.
And he was obsessed. It was the passion of his life that he, had to kind of come through the back door to expose it to people, but it worked and he did it.